Support for this podcast comes from the law firm of Davis Malm. Whether you're a developer, property owner, manager, or commercial tenant, their real estate attorneys know the lay of the land, not just the law. Learn more at davismalm.com.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. Boston Globe reporter Jason Laughlin, welcome back to The Common.
Hey, Daryl, good to talk to you again.
Yes, indeed. So, Jason, Massachusetts Department of Children and Families is still looking for new leadership months after former Commissioner Linda Spears left to take a job in Washington, D.C. And Jason, you recently reported that a group of advocates for youth in foster care want a say in who gets to lead the department. So I want to know more about these advocates and their demands. But first, just break down to us what the child welfare system in Massachusetts is, what it looks like, and where are they in terms of finding a new DCF commissioner?
As you mentioned, the previous commissioner left in the fall. And there's just an acting interim person right now holding that position. It's an appointment job, so it's a fairly opaque process. This is going to be appointed. The Secretary of Health and Human Services will be the person intimately involved with that. And that's kind of one of the issues that this group is concerned about. They want a more transparent process. They want to have some stake in it and some say in who the next commissioner is.
Right.
But DCF as an agency has enormous reach. It's the state's child welfare agency. So when there's an allegation of abuse or neglect of children, DCF gets involved. Annually, they can interact with 86,000 children and adults in Massachusetts. And among those interactions, there is the possibility of a child being removed from the home. In many cases, that can be warranted, but it is nonetheless traumatic. So the influence DCF has with a family can be incredibly significant.
We're talking about the commissioner right now. Are there any other vacancies in the child welfare system?
There are. There's a division of the public defender's office that works on juvenile cases. The person who runs that office and who it has for more than a decade, he's going to be stepping down this month. And the chief of the juvenile court in Massachusetts is also expecting to retire at some point this year. So all three of those, the commissioner and then those two other jobs, they all have enormous say in what happens to kids that get involved in the system.
Understood. Now let's move on to the advocates. Tell me about some of them and their stories and what their stories tell us about the system.
Yeah, the group is called Family Matters First. They have chapters in the Boston area and in Western Massachusetts. And they are people who themselves were foster kids or are parents whose children got involved in the child welfare system. And frankly, they're not happy with the way things have been run. They make the argument that in their cases, being separated from their families was potentially worse than what they were experiencing within their families, whatever those dynamics were that drew DCF's attention to begin with. And there are economic and racial disparities in the child welfare system that are really concerning that they want attention brought to.
What are the dangers of separating a child from their family unnecessarily?
Incredible potential for trauma there. There can be PTSD. There can be difficulty forming relationships depending on what their experience is beyond the separation. It is worth emphasizing that is not a given, that there are people that went through the foster system and really benefited from it. And, we've all heard horror stories about kids that probably should have been separated from their families and weren't. So it's a really nuanced, really complicated situation. And it's a hard thing to judge what's best for a child when you're talking about upending a family. Like, what's more intimate than that?
Understood. Now, having said all that, talk to me about the changes advocates want to see happen.
This is a really interesting issue, Daryl, and I think it's something to keep an eye on. There is not a unanimous opinion on what should be happening in DCF. This group of advocates, they want to see many fewer child separations from their families. Their perspective is that often that hurts families more than it helps them, hurts children more than it helps them. And there are cases where that is certainly the case. The children who went through it will tell you, being in a foster family, being in a residential placement was terrible for me. It did lasting harm. There's another perspective from others who are invested in this system that DCF should be separating children more often from their families, and that they're leaving kids in dangerous situations because they're reluctant to separate families. So there's a tension there between both sides, and I think there are fair arguments to be made from both sides. But I think those are sort of the two poles that are going to affect this decision.
Got it. Jason, we're going to take a break right here, but when we get back, I want to talk about how the Massachusetts state welfare system compares to other states.
Sure.
So we'll be right back.
Did you kill Marlene Johnson?
I think you're one of the first people to have actually asked.
From WBUR and ZSP Media, this is Beyond All Repair, a new podcast about an unsolved murder that will leave you questioning everything.
Somebody should be in jail for murdering my sister.
A woman who's never been believed.
As long as they think I have done this, then they're not looking for who actually did this.
And that's what makes it a cold case.
No, it's a botched case.
And a search for the truth, once and for all.
Wow, it just gets more interesting.
Beyond All Repair. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Be careful. You're digging in a place that's been very peaceful for a while.
Do it anyway. Dig.
And we're back with Boston Globe reporter Jason Laughlin. Jason, you did some reporting late last year, and you mentioned this earlier, that Latino children are more likely to enter foster care than any other state in the country. I want to talk more about that. Can you just lay out what the situation is there?
Yeah, there is a real intersection with poverty there.
Yeah.
There are mandatory reporting jobs, like a teacher, a doctor, that if they suspect child abuse, they are legally required to report that to DCF. And DCF officials have said that they do feel they are getting referrals for situations that really aren't child abuse, that there is obviously something with the kid that's problematic. But again, it's probably more attributable to poverty and lack of access to proper care than it is to a parent not treating a child right. Mm-hmm. And that does intersect with the Latino population because it's one of the poorest in the state. So you have this sort of natural overlap there. The rate of children entering the foster system in Massachusetts exceeds the national average, wow. As does the number of placements each child typically experiences. So those numbers suggest that we have a system here that is more active and more involved in families' lives than many other states in the country.
Right. And I guess the question is this activity and these placements, the amount of them, is it a good or a bad thing? That's the tension that folks are trying to work through in this moment.
Exactly. And, obviously the Harmony Montgomery trial up in New Hampshire just ended. And in that case, a little girl was placed with her father, who ultimately was found guilty of killing her. Yeah. There are other cases where the now adult foster children will say, I was better off with my parent than I ended up being in the child welfare system.
Mm-hmm. Well, what will you be looking out for as the story develops?
We're obviously going to wait for the announcement from DCF of who the new commissioner is, but I know this group is supposed to be meeting with one of the top executives in the Office of Health and Human Services in March. And I've been in touch with them. I'm going to hear from them on how that meeting goes and what comes out of it. It'll be interesting to see if they do get more access than outside groups typically have. I'm also just kind of looking at the larger issue of the child welfare system's activity writ large. I'm really interested in that placement issue, that children in Massachusetts tend to be placed in more residential settings than in other states, because that can be pretty harmful for a kid. If you have at a young age a lack of stability, a lack of feeling that you have a home, that can have lifelong consequences for you. So that's something, a topic that I'm going to be doing some more reporting on in the next few weeks and months.
Got it. Man, Jason, thank you so much for this story and taking the time to talk to us about it. We really, really appreciate it. If folks want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Thanks for asking that. My email address is jason.laughlin, which is LAUGHLIN @globe.com. I definitely respond to messages. I like to hear from people. It's how I know about what's going on in the system, what stories we should be writing about. So I always appreciate people reaching out.
Understood. And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. If you want to get in touch with us, hit us up on Instagram @WBURTheCommon or send us an email at thecommon@WBUR.org. I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and I will talk to you tomorrow.